Achieving at Work. By the way, fascinating book. I have never freaking cried on a. It's supposed to be an organizational book, and when I was speaking, I am a dad. I have a daughter, so it's like I think few chapters are pretty hard to run by if you care. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's mind-numbing to see leaders who make themselves vulnerable to the point and share with the community. And thank you for writing this book. Love to know what sparked you to write such a book.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, thank you for reading it. I feel very privileged that you did that. I always appreciate when someone actually reads it. I at the very beginning of this podcast, you asked me about my background, and I shared it with you. But what I didn't share with you, but what I talk a lot about in the book, is that what fueled my career success was an underlying belief that I wasn't good enough. And what I have found in working with so many of my colleagues and fellow leaders and employees and people managers is that many of us fall into this category of overachiever, never feeling like what we're doing is enough, never taking time out to really celebrate and acknowledge the achievements that we're having, incredibly hard on ourselves and setting unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others. And so, I think the inspiration for the book was a realization based on some research that my co-author and I have done that two-thirds of us adults have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience when we were growing up. Adverse childhood experiences, the acronym is ACEs, the ACEs. And the 10 adverse childhood experiences are things like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, addiction in the family, neglect, mental illness, family member who's gone to jail. There are these 10 descriptors. And the research shows that 2/3 experienced at least one ACE. And sadly, 40% of all of us experienced 2 or more. And so the reality is that many of us that come from a dysfunctional past that had one of those experiences, and maybe not even necessarily one of those experiences, but maybe an overly bearing parent or a critical parent. There's sort of a continuum of serious issues that happen to kids when they're little. What we don't realize, and what I unfortunately, and I hate to admit this, but it's true, don't like to admit, is that 30 years of my 33-year career, I was living what I call the unconscious wounded career path. And what I mean by that is I was completely unaware of how much some of the experiences I had when I was little were actually affecting me every single day. And so what I realized too in working with so many leaders and colleagues is that when I noticed that when other people were having strong negative reactions to something happening in relationship to a colleague at work, it was often an overreaction to the situation at hand. And I started thinking about, I think that their reaction is being influenced by outdated scripts from their past. Well, let me say a little bit more about what I mean by that. So when you grow up, and by the way, this is not about judging parents for doing something wrong. I believe our parents, in many cases, also came from a dysfunctional past. I think they did the best they did. And it's also appreciating that many of us walk away from our childhood with some limiting belief about ourselves. Mine was, I'm not good enough. For others, it's, I'm unwanted. I'm not smart. I can't do anything right. There's a whole continuum of these limiting negative beliefs. And what happened when we were little is that when something was happening in the family system or the family situation that was stressful, it would, cause a trigger. So the trigger might be I'm in trouble or I'm being judged or criticized. The limiting belief pops right front and center in our head. And then we have a variety of different strategies and adaptive behaviors for how we navigate that situation or how we navigated it when we were little. For me, it was all about people pleasing and being as good as I could. If I could just be as good as possible, the goody two shoes, the good little girl, maybe my dad's anger and rage would not explode on that particular day. And, so then I move into my career. And again, if I get triggered at work and I all of a sudden feel like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not adding value, I immediately go into the old behaviors, people pleasing, trying to do no work-life balance, trying to prove myself at work. Because somewhere along the line, and this is true for a lot of people, I unintentionally, unconsciously delegated the responsibility to people in authority to determine my value and my worth, and completely unconscious to this. And so again, this is something that's very common for a lot of overachievers. And when I started really looking at this unconscious dynamic that was affecting me in so many negative ways, here are some of the costs, and I really want to get into the future and create the hope, because I feel like I'm spending too much time on the negative. But the negative costs of the unconscious wounded career include exhaustion, no work-life balance, never taking time out to have fun and enjoy and relax, never slowing down enough to do that, strained relationships with bosses and colleagues at work, and oftentimes distant relationships with family members, and failed marriages, health issues. I mean, the list goes on and on. And from a team standpoint, if you got all this happening, all this unconscious past dynamic playing out in your team's performance is not optimized. And so what Martha and I, my co-author, Martha Finney, the amazing Martha Finney, and I did is we wrote Healing at Work in a way that teaches people how to use the science of neuroplasticity, which tells us that we can rewire our brains. We have the ability to reshape the neural pathways in our brain based on the science of neuroplasticity. And we introduce the concepts of positive psychology as well. But ultimately, the very unusual proposition of the book is that for the 2/3 of us that had a dysfunctional past, we can actually use the workplace as a laboratory for healing. And so, the inspiration for the book is, how do I help reduce the pain and suffering of so many of us in the workplace and in our careers, so that we can be fully present and fully optimized in our careers and in our workplaces. And so what we do is we take readers on a journey to teach them how to do this, because the destination includes actually a much better relationship with colleagues and with family members, more work-life balance, much more centered, deep, relaxed approaches to how we work. And possibly one of the most important benefits is that when conflict happens at work, rather than going into a triggered unconscious response, we are much more able to have in the moment present interpretations of what's happening, which leads to better choices, better decisions, better actions. And ultimately, my secret passion is, how do we shape cultures in a way where we can eliminate whatever toxicity exists? No culture is perfect, but how do we improve the experience of everybody in the company as we start to become more conscious, as we step onto that conscious healing career path? So that was a long answer to your question about what inspired the book. But it was basically about helping to teach people how to reduce so much suffering and pain and stress and anxiety and worry, and show them that it can be done in a whole different way. And that's the premise of the book.